One of the quotes I liked in the book was you quoted a contemporary source saying that George III, George IV and William IV were in order an imbecile, a profligate and a buffoon, and I suppose she came along and sort of saved that from sort of going completely downhill. And I wondered to what extent you thought she was self-consciously burnishing this image of the monarchy, and how aware she was of the reception of her image in the wider country and indeed the wider world.
I think Victoria was very aware of her image and very aware of the newspapers. She read the newspapers frequently. I mean, every day. She always had, and she was very aware that her uncles had been pilloried by the media, and she was very determined that she would be seen as more popular. And she did follow her own press coverage quite intently, and she was very aware that monarchs had a duty to not only do right, but look right as well. And she was very concerned about how things looked, as in the case of when she married Albert. They got married and Albert was sort of eager to have a big long honeymoon, 6 weeks together, and she kind of said to him, very gently, you forget, my dearest love, that I'm the sovereign. She only wanted a couple of days because she had to be back signing her dispatches, because she knew that everything she did was discussed and talked about. What interests me about her is that she never took it for granted, even though, we look back now and she seems as if she was cemented on the throne forever and ever. She never took it for granted that she could just kind of have a few days off, and, who would no one mind. She was intently working at it the whole time. I think it's very interesting when we think about Victoria, about the Kensington system, the way in which she was brought up, because it's obviously a horrific way for anyone to live, and it was a miserable childhood. But at the same time, it instilled in her great qualities. Not only did it instill in her determination, bravery and courage in standing up to her mother and Conroy, and also sort of the ability to hide her own feelings, to keep her own counsel, which came from being watched all the time, and also the fact that she had a very strict regime of education, got her in very sort of good, regular habits. But also, I think the very fact that it seemed her childhood seemed so unstable, her success seemed so unstable, it always seemed to be something that someone was trying to take away from her, really made her appreciate it and value it.
You mentioned Albert there, and the last thing I wanted to ask you about was her relationship with Albert, because you say at one point in the book, when she's choosing a husband, in a sense, she wanted a wife.
Albert and Victoria are one of our greatest love stories. It's really, it's the greatest long-lasting love story. But at the same time, it's had these early motivations which are really fascinating, because Victoria had met Albert when she was a young girl, but she hadn't been that impressed with him. He seemed rather dull. He unfortunately fell asleep in his plate in her birthday dinner party, which would be a disaster. He didn't really seem like kind of the man she wanted. But then, after she turned queen, and she realised, as she became queen, that either she lived with her mother or she got married. It was a choice. She couldn't live alone, even though she was queen. So she began to look with more interest at her cousin Albert. And when he came over to visit her one time, she fell passionately in love with him, on the spot. And he of course fell in love with her, because she was no longer a silly girl who liked going dancing. She was Queen of England. It's wonderful, because Victoria was not only the first person to be called Victoria, but she was also the first person ever, I think, probably, ever to propose to a man, because she actually had to propose to Albert because she was queen. She couldn't accept a proposal from him. And she proposed to him. But at the same time, it was a relationship that was almost crafted by the fact that she proposed to him, because she very much wanted someone to assist her, to look after her, almost, in one phrase, help with a blotting paper, whereas he himself had hoped very much to be rather more of a, more than just a consort. He wanted to be he saw himself as a great intellectual capacity, and he wanted to help her rule. So there were a lot of battles. She finished the battles for power with her mother, and there were huge amounts of battle for power with Albert. So she saw him as someone who would be able to assist her, to be able to help her in the same way that a man at the time might see a wife, someone to converse with about appealing subject. Whereas he wanted to be a real co-ruler, and there were lots of problems. So she got rid of her mother. She ended the mother-daughter, the battle between her for power for her mother, and then there was a struggle for power with Albert, because he wanted to discuss politics. And it's very much like reading about a man and his wife nowadays. The wife says, why do you never talk to me in the evenings? And he says, well, I talk about work all day, don't want to talk about it in the evenings. Victoria was the same. She said, I don't want to discuss politics with you, Albert. And he was determined to discuss it, and desperate too. So the pair of them had this kind of struggle for power and sort of influence, which was only really resolved when Victoria fell pregnant, and Albert began to take over more of the role as she moved more and more towards her sort of date of labour.
How did your own view of Victoria change from the point at which you began the book to completing it?
Well, I began writing the book kind of attracted by Victoria's passion and vibrancy and energy and determination, and really wanted to find out more. And I also love mother-daughter struggles, and she had a huge mother-daughter struggle. And what I really felt at the end was not only this great appeal, this great attraction to her, a fascination with her, but also a real awe for her as well, because I had all the visions of Victoria that everyone has, and the very negative visions we have of the Victorian age as well. The repressive age, a time in which things weren't expressed, that so a lot of perhaps the problems of repression in later Britain were due to. And now I kind of have this amazing awe for it. I think not only is the Victorian age very misrepresented, but I have this incredible awe for her. So even though she had this very harsh upbringing, she went on to a life of great triumph, and I really find that very awe-inspiring.
Kate Williams. Kate's book, Becoming Queen, is published by Hutchinson and is available now in hardback. Her previous book, England's Mistress, The Infamous Life of Emma Hamilton, Mistress of Lord Nelson, is available as an Arrow paperback.